So I just want to start by relating to the Smiths and what you said about, I guess to both, to what you said about part-time jobs. Just to clarify, I meant people who are working, it's a problem that, with people who are underemployed working part-time jobs because they're forced to because they cannot find full-time positions. Even people who are instances of people who are overqualified or highly educated can only find part-time positions and therefore cannot make a livable income. So I just want to clarify that. Also, I would argue that capitalist society is actually based on the reserve army of the unemployed because that's what gives them the power to pay low wages. If everyone's employed, then it hurts them if they lose workers. Workers can argue for higher wages because they can't fire them and get someone to pay, and pay them a lower wage. So I would argue that, no, they're going to continue to be unemployed people because in this society, in laissez-faire, they require that pool in order to have the power.
For the Keynes group, having safety net programs for the government, that's great, but when you look in the public sector, when you're looking for government benefits, you have to be at a certain level. So for instance, you need a certain income to be able to be given certain amounts of money for, if it's food, if it's for healthcare, if it's for dental care, if it's for unemployment, whatever, and that's not distributed equally for people. So sometimes if the government is giving someone, let's say, $200 a month or $200 a week or something on unemployment, that may not be able to cover all of their basic necessities. And if you're looking at a job in the private sector, if you're not working, let's say, full-time, you're not eligible for certain healthcare, vision, and dental benefits. So a lot of capitalist companies will keep workers at a hourly rate or at an hourly standard that they know is going to fall under that, so they don't in turn have to pay for these additional programs to give people what should be a right and something that's not a privilege, as Heidi mentioned earlier. And for the Smith group, if we're getting 2.5%, I believe you said, for the unemployment after, was it World War II?
Yeah.
Well, one of the issues, as we mentioned before, is if we're looking at the outsourcing jobs, that's something that that's not going to magically disappear. If private companies are spending so much and paying people overseas at lower wages, Americans are not going to benefit for that. So we can create, for the Keynes group, like there could be government jobs, there could be public sector jobs that are created, but with the private sector jobs, a lot of times, well, cheaper labor, let's send our jobs over there, and that creates unemployed people regardless. And one of the things that you mentioned before is if you don't like the practices of a certain company, you can just move on to another company, except for we have all of these monopolies. If you don't like Walmart, well, you have to go to Target. If you don't like Target, you have to go to Kmart. If you don't like Kmart, eventually you run out of places because all of these monopolies have been created and there are so few small businesses for you to turn to.
Thank you. Question 2 from the floor to the Keynesian.
Okay, so Keynes believes that there should be government intervention when the economy is in a depression, recession, or bust. But if the government is given this much control to help the economy when times are bad, what will stop them from keeping control of the economy and interfering when things start to turn around?
Okay, ladies, let's go.
Okay, so you're asking what will stop them from intervening when things turn around? You technically don't want the government to stop intervening. I keep going back to the ARPA and DARPA agencies. So these are government agencies that continually put money back into our economy. So again, the cell phones and your computers, without these companies won't be able to make enough money. Apple, for example, let's say they make $2 billion a year with everything. They can't make those $2 billion if the government didn't spend $5 billion trying to produce all this technology. So you always want them to intervene. You always want them to be in the background. You can't not just get rid of the government and say, okay, we don't need you anymore, because technically you do need them. That's how technology gets improved. That's how you have GPS systems. You don't want them to just go away. And like Val was saying, you're always going to, I forgot what you're saying. You just
no one wants to spend more money than they have to. Obviously, when there's a bust and things are bad, the government is going to put more money into our economy. And when there is a boom, the government is still going to be there in the background doing their agencies that they do. But they're not going to be like spending extra money that they don't have to spend. If the employment is really high and there's less need for stimulus checks, they're not going to start putting more money into that. It's all about keeping their focus on what is happening at that time. So during a boom, they're not going to put their focus on their money focus onto things that aren't important at the time. So, for example, if all of the problems with pollution and everything going on like that, if that's what's important, that's what the government's going to focus on. The government will still focus on unemployment because it'll always be there, but they won't have as much money going into that. It's about where the government focuses their money.
Yeah, and I can't state it any more than I already have. And that's the whole reason why it works so well with the Keynesian theory. It's not, okay, what's the government gonna do? It's not all about the government. It's the government working with the private sector to see what can we do to make it better for the people, to make it so we're not gonna always have these mismatch of jobs, to make it so maybe we can try and keep the unemployment down, or make conditions better at different companies. So we have to keep in mind that that's the Keynesian theory. It's not the government's gonna do this, because the government can't do everything. We know that. And that's why it works best if the government and the companies, or the private sector, or the big corporations, whatever you wanna call them, they're working together on this. So it ends up being really a win-win situation for both.
Thank you. Rebuttal? Sorry.
And take
Make it fast.
okay, take credit cards for example. For private sectors, you have so you get a Home Depot card, a Kohl's charge, a Best Buy credit card, and now there's a boom. Everyone's applying for all these credit cards. You're applying for them. The government's going to have these rules and regulations applied so that if you say you think yourself you're booming with your own money and you apply for that, the credit card is going to go through this system to where the government basically says, no, you know what, you can't afford to have a credit card right now, because if those rules and regulations weren't in place for that consumer, then that consumer is going to take that credit card, spend, and then they're going to fall back down. So the government will still be back there even if there's a boom in the economy.
Thank you. Rebuttal, first by the,
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. That's very true. It's very true.
okay. Go.
So we were just saying that even when the economy does improve, the government is still gonna be involved in it because they're recollecting stimulus check money. They're supposed to be retaxing to re-get that money back that they put out, so then they're just taking money away from people. And it's not necessarily the government spending money to create advances for technology. If you look at Apple versus Android, that's competition between two private companies creating more advances in technology, not government funded. I mean, there are instances that there are government funded companies, such as like during the Cold War, the space race, NASA government funded, and but that still was competition forcing the government to put money into it and having that go back and forth, but it's not necessary to have that occurring.
Thank you.
Okay, well, for us, our position is when you're looking at, I'm sorry?
Keep it short.
Oh, okay. When you're looking at government intervention, our position would be right now, government intervention is something that's, it's more capitalist intervention on the government, and that's been a large influence in today's economy. And going off of what Heidi said, looking for something that's better for the people and it's all about jobs and job creations. Unfortunately, that's not something that that happens, because we have, if you look at Big Pharma as an example, you have private companies like Monsanto as an example that's able to control the FDA, the Keynes group, I believe, before you guys mentioned electability and how you're able to elect people to do the job that you want to do. But and we think that's the power of the people, but realistically, we have lobbyists that are able to create these super PACs and that are able to get people in to push whatever their particular agenda is. You have gerrymandering in certain counties, so big government isn't something that's hypothetical. Big government is something that currently exists, and unfortunately, it doesn't exist as much in the job creation prospects. It's not so much in making sure we're giving people the healthcare and education and everything that we need, even though our economy currently is improving right now. These are still problems that we struggle with. So government intervention sometimes isn't, a lot of times gives us the things that we don't necessarily want, and they're not giving us the things that we need in healthcare, or sorry, in jobs and things as public healthcare and education and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Last word by the Keynesians.
On the rebut? Yeah,
Last word.
okay.
Okay.
Here's what we got. If the government, we couldn't find a job, we had a lot of layoffs. And without the government intervention, we'd have a lot of companies that would take over and destroy the free business by eliminating the competition. Okay. They need it, yeah. Right. So where do they, yeah, right. Put into the cloud. Right.
Private sectors.
So we're gonna need you to take the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know what that money is getting put back into our so we need taxes.
Okay, so just, last comment towards the Marx group. The lobbyist comment about lobbyists being something that does exist and big government does exist. It does exist. Your example of Monsanto, yes, there are people that used to work at Monsanto that are now on the board of directors for FDA, and that's why Monsanto's getting away with what they're doing. But that goes back to being aware and being focused, and the government focus, and back to the point where people are the ones that vote in the end. There's no, there's never going to be any type of dictatorship in the United States. It's not possible. It's down to who voted those people onto those board of directors, and being aware of what's going on, and, clearly people didn't pay attention enough to know that those people that are on the board for the FDA worked for Monsanto before. It's all about being focused.
Okay, and then for the Smith, well, first, let's stop looking at taxes as such a negative thing, because yes, they are recollecting and they are taxing people, but you know what, that money is continually going back into our economy. Take the stadium, for example, that they're building that stadium, but with that stadium, they're gonna reconstruct that whole downtown area. Now guess what, now there's gonna be more businesses, people are gonna wanna shop there, the government's creating that demand with our money, so essentially we all have to work together. And then you said that, that Apple and Android basically didn't come from government-funded agencies. They actually did. They actually have been creating it. I did some research on this stuff in a previous class. So without ARPA and DARPA, there wouldn't be an Apple versus Android. There's no way that a private sector company can have enough money for just one person with a great idea to say, you know what, I'm going to create this iPhone. There's just no way. They're going to have to use funding from the government to use those technological resources that they've come up with. And because of that, they have Apple versus Android. Yes, they're two different products, but they're both benefiting from what the government created with our money that's getting taxes. So these taxes are constantly getting put back into our economy.
Okay. Great, ladies. Work on your closing statements, and the ladies on the floor, work on your feedback.
Well, I was starting that.
I don't know, because you guys told me I was doing one, but we're switching it. So I'm just waiting for you guys to get your output. I can take a quarter.
We need to go back and say what we said before, like.
Like the $50 per hour.
Yeah, and you could, and I don't
And then
know,
someone can
this
vote
kind
on
of,
the as or.
kind of goes over a little bit in a nutshell.
Which one? Right.
Okay, well then I'll,
Okay, so I'm gonna start at a starting, and I'm gonna go right before Azure.
And you can go to Azure and find the coordinates and everything.
so I think if the Keynesian theory, one of the benefits, I suppose, is bringing up because everybody tries to point out, every time we come up with anything, understand what the government is. We have to reiterate that the Keynesian theory is not just government, it's government working with the private sector. So that's why he's in it. He took a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and he wants to come into that common ground. So I think that would be something good to reiterate.
Okay.
You know, I think, Mm-hmm. And then I can bring in this point right here.
Just the balance of the second thing and how.
Okay, ladies, one more minute, please.
Okay.
So we can alleviate. Let's go first. So the closing statement.
Alrighty. start with Smith's perspective again for the closing statement.
So from Smith, we think it's important to recognize it's the freedom from the government, and there are plenty of people who are unemployed that are willing to take jobs if someone is unhappy and wants to go into a different specialization. And that's one of the good things, is you get to pick your specialization and enjoy your work and enjoy what you're doing. And when goods are brought to the same market, it creates competition between different companies, and the laissez-faire form of government with no involvement is what allows there to be unregulated competition. And people are always going to be motivated by self-interest, and that's what's going to push them to pursue a job that they enjoy and a position that they want, and to be looking for work continuously.
And since the workers are self-interested, they're not gonna choose to be unemployed. Like, if it comes down to having a job that they don't like, they're still gonna choose to make money, to feed their children, to put a roof over their head. Or they can go and they can start their own business and make money that way.
And the wealthy, regardless of the situation, they're gonna be putting money back into the economy, whether it's through a private or a public sector, because when they go to school, if it's private or public, they still are gonna have to pay for it.
And especially when they send their kids to school, they'll be going to expensive schools, and the government isn't helping them with paying for it. They're paying for it out of their own pockets, so all of their money is going back into the economy. And consumers can control who makes money and who fails. So if you don't like Walmart, don't go to Walmart. If you don't like any big corporations, I'm sure you can find a mom and pop grocery store around the corner and support them and local businesses.
And then that always gives people the opportunity. You can start anywhere in life. You can have this good mom and pop store that isn't very popular. People might not know about it. And as people are unhappy with large corporations and support smaller businesses, that sends money into them, and then they're able to start growing into a larger corporation.
And then who says that the government is going to reinvest your taxes back into the economy? For sure, 100%. Like, that's one of the problems that we're debating in this presidential race in 2016 about whether we should raise taxes and where those taxes are going and who should reap the benefit of those taxes.
Thank you. Marxist.
Reuters reports that in 2014, America's Fortune 500 companies withheld $2.1 trillion in profits overseas to avoid paying their taxes. Apple, the biggest company offender on the list, withheld $181.1 billion in offshore profits, which means they evaded paying $59.2 billion in taxes. This is capitalism, the fabled trickle-down effect. Capitalism hid $2.1 trillion in 2014 and a refusal to reimburse workers for their many hours of dedication to their jobs.
According to the United States Census Bureau, in 2014, in America's capitalist nation, the official poverty rate was 14.8%. There were 46.7 million people living in poverty. You'd imagine that those 46.7 million Americans could have benefited from the 2.1 trillion these capitalists pocketed to feed their own greed. We have seen the 99% rise up against the 1%. The demand for a minimum of $15 per hour wage.
And as income stays stagnant while the price of goods increase, you're constantly being told that healthcare is a privilege and should be privatized, while people struggle to pay their bills and to put a roof over their head. And the cost of college education continues to skyrocket because capitalists don't care about you living a high quality of life. They only care about high profits. So people are being exploited at every turn and being alienated from their work by working long hours, 40 hours a week, and aren't fairly compensated relative to the big profits and CEOs and big companies. And that people have also little time to spend with their family, and being alienated from their work also lowers the productivity of the workers in the economy.
According to NPR, America doesn't federally mandate paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave, or mandatory paid vacations for all workers. Yes, we are the only country that has these laws or lack thereof. So I asked, why is the concept of every citizen receiving an equal share perceived as a determinant to society. How is redistributing wealth worse than the heavenly flawed trickle-down effect that claims to be the driving force behind job creation? Unemployment under capitalism is not only inevitable, it's your unfortunate constitutional right.
Thank you.
Well, leading off on Mark's, which is, thank you for that. Yeah, without government intervention in what you're just talking about, there would be no control over the big companies, the trusts, the monopolies, and the big companies within the states. They would be able to take over and destroy a lot of the rising prices, or the competition, I should say, and then everything would go up. There'd be all these rising prices. And then the middle class or the poor would never be able to buy any of these. Markets don't really care about the people. They just care about what the benefit that they're gonna get. So the government intervenes in that to make sure they put caps on things and they tax where it needs to be taxed. So it's working together on that. Therefore, the capitalist not only fails to create equality of outcome, but it also fails to provide equality opportunity.
So Keynes understands that there will be failure in the economy, but because he aims for equilibrium and he understands that the booms and the busts will happen, he will try to balance out the input and output of the economy by using government intervention and private sectors so that the virtuous cycle will continue and the economy won't completely crash. So that saying the poor is going to stay poor and the rich are going to stay rich, he's trying to eliminate that by keeping the economy at a balance.
Keynesian theory also believes and knows that government assistance can be helpful in times of need to be able to let those citizens have a demand for the supply. The demand is what creates supply and what keeps the economy flowing.
So government creates standards for companies to follow, and when companies or private sectors fall short, that is when the government steps in and lends a helping hand for some. Now, the government can't work alone with the government. It is the people, and that's why we are getting taxed. We need to work not just the private sector, but as a whole with the government. So we get taxed, and this money does get reused. It goes into government agencies, jobs, government jobs, public schools, and that way the whole community benefits as a whole, and it's not just the government and private sector.
Thank you. Wow. Okay, the floor people, get up, and I just wanted to make sure there's enough time for feedback.